Jump!
Because this will be a long video, I've cut it into 6 main sections. You can click on the annotations on the screen or use links in the video description to skip to the desired part of the video, or just choose to watch it from the beginning. I'm just making a video on how to make a good DMR because I was looking on YouTube and just trying to think of some videos I could make and noticed that not really that many people made good videos on how to make a DMR. There was 1 or 2 videos, but as many of you guys maybe that have already made a DMR or have been looking to make a DMR, there's lots of videos, or not videos, lots of guides out there. The most popular would be the Holy Grail of the DMR, and a lot of this stuff that I'm going to be covering is in that, but right here, just to give you some eye candy, here is my gun I normally use. This is a SR25 with a GMP base, for the externals at least, but I mean everything except for the receiver is put together by hand, and the reason that I chose that is just because it's a 19 tooth gun instead of a 15 tooth gun, so it has an elongated cylinder and barrel. And this one is my friend's gun that is not upgraded internally yet, but this is a real sword SVD. Sounds cool when you cock it, but yeah, this one, he wants me to make it into a DMR, and if you guys want to see that in a video, I can do that. Like have a video series where I'm building a DMR, because mine is already fully tuned. But basically I took this quote from somebody on Reddit named Snaky Bitey on his guide. He says, so what makes a good DMR? 3 things: a consistent power output with a 2 or 3 FPS deviation at a worst case scenario. So that's basically saying that you want your compression really good in your gearbox, and then your gearbox to your bucking compression good, so it's very consistent. A stable and consistent hop plus a well-made straight barrel, so that's basically goes with the same thing, being consistent, and that lets you put your shots on target pretty well. And 3, high quality heavy ammunition, which is kind of hard to find, but I've just been using AEX .36s now, and those worked out really well for me. But I would go a little bit higher to 0.4, but I can't really find any good 0.4 BBs that have worked for me. So I would say the first step for choosing a DMR is the base gun. So a lot of people will have threads, will be like, oh, what gun should I get? What DMR should I get? Or what gun should I make into a DMR? And you can use basically any gun in Airsoft to make into a DMR. But if you want one that's going to be accepted for things like Milsim West, you probably want like an SR25 or an SVD like I have here, because those are, like, in the real world, they're shooting the higher caliber rounds, and that's what is used for a DMR. Doesn't need a marksman rifle. And you also are going to need to lock it to semi-auto for most fields if you want that higher FPS limit. But basically I would say you could choose between like M4s. A lot of people do those. I think it's a little bit boring, but if you put on like the tubular handguard, you can make it into an SPR. That's pretty cool. SR25 is my favorite, obviously. That's why I use it. SVDs are also good. They're a little bit more proprietary, and I haven't tuned one yet myself, but those work from what I've seen people, and they have the longer cylinder. The L85 series also has the elongated cylinder, but in my experience, unless you do like custom work to the hop-up with like bolting into the body with a top-down center mod. I used to have an ICS L85, and I wasn't able to R-hop it well, because as the hop-up arm puts pressure down on the BB, it is kind of applied sideways. So unless you mod the whole hop-up unit to do top-down center, it was not working too well with R-hop. So basically, I would say that you don't want to go too far from what's standard or take standard parts, because things like O-ring nozzles are hard to find in certain like very obscure guns. So I would stick with generally like M4, SR25, AK. AKs make really good. If I was gonna make a DMR that had a normal gearbox, I'd probably choose an AK because their hop-ups, in my opinion, are a lot better than an M4. At least my AK I had was super accurate. And besides that, you can really choose whatever gun you want, but in a lot of cases it's better to make it look more realistic. So depending on what gun you start with, you're gonna need to replace a different amount of internals to make it into a true DMR. So I would say if your gun, for top priority, like if your gun does not have these parts, you are going to need to replace them or add them, depending what they are. So a full metal tooth piston, I think you need that because a lot of guns do not come with that stock. I recommend SHS, but I'm going to get into the specific brands later. But if you need a stronger spring, let's just say your gun is shooting 400 stock or 350 and you're trying to make it shoot 500, obviously you're going to need a bigger spring, stronger spring. The barrel is basically needed in any gun if you want to make it into a true DMR. You can't really get around that. Hop-up bucking in R-hop, but you don't necessarily need to replace the bucking. You can just flat hop the bucking and R-hop it and that'll work fine if you get good air compression. That's going to be a reoccurring theme for this. Ball bearing metal spring guide. This is also very important because with the stronger spring, your spring guide is not only going to be under more tension, but it is also going to need those bearings there to not snap. Because I've actually had springs in guns without bearings that compressed and then ended up snapping. So you don't want that because then you're gonna have to open up your gearbox and figure out what's wrong with that. The next thing I would think that you definitely need is a O-ring air nozzle. That's super important because most guns, there's a few like LCT and I think E&L and a few of the higher end guns like the Real Sword SVDs come with the O-ring air nozzle. That is very important for getting the air seal perfect, and you can't really build a DMR without having an O-ring air nozzle. That's up there. And the last thing on that list is a Mosfet, because since you're going to be running your DMR in semi, I think for the trigger response, you definitely are going to be wanting an 11-1 LiPo battery to basically get that faster trigger response. I mean, I can run this SR25 just fine on a 7.4. It's shooting 500 FPS. And there's really not too much of a difference, but it just helps overall to have your electrical system good. And with a polyfuse Mosfet is what I recommend so that you don't really have to worry about your electronic system. If something goes wrong, it's just going to set off that polyfuse and you'll be good. So then the medium priority, I would say, would be a gearbox shell. And that's only if you have a V2 or a V7 because those are more prone to cracking under the higher stress. So if you have an M14, M4, MP5, if you want to make that into a DMR, whatever, I would probably replace the gearbox shell. But if you have a nicer brand like ICS, you might not need to, but down the road you might. Also, if you're playing in a colder climate, you're probably going to want to get the gearbox shell just because they're more prone to cracking under stress in the cold. And then my next medium priority would be the hop-up unit. And the reason I put that as medium, I could even put that in low. As long as you can tune it to not have much play in it, which is most hop-ups are pretty good nowadays. You don't really need to replace that. I don't think, I mean, in this gun, I've upgraded it to the teeth and I run a plastic combat machine hop-up unit because that's just what I got the best FPS consistency and feeding with. So that's what I went with. There's really no reason not to. For the next thing I would say is gears. Gears are very important to upgrade. But in most cases, the stock gears, as long as they are good steel, so like XYT gears or whatever, you can probably shim them to be fine. They're not getting a ton of cycles either if you're running it just in semi, so they'll last a long time most likely. But if they're like cheaper pot metal or TM gears, definitely you'll need to replace them. The motor, I would almost put that in the top, but I didn't want to put everything in the top priority. You want a high torque motor, a Neo motor, so like I'll go over the brands later, but SHS, ASG, those are good brands. Cutoff lever is very important because you're going to be only shooting your gun on semi, so if your semi does not work and if you have a shitty cutoff lever that breaks, then It's going to be hard to get your gun running again. You will need to do a lot of bad, annoying things. And then bushings. If your gun doesn't come with steel bushings, I would definitely get them. I wouldn't use bearings. Sorry, my voice is going out a little bit. So for low priority, I would say Gearbox shell if you have a V3 gun. Those are tanks I've only seen like 1 or 2 break. Compression parts are also low priority. So I'm talking about the cylinder head, the what is it called? The cylinder, and basically just those, and maybe the bucking if you are hopping your gun. If you can get it to work, so like good FPS deviation or low FPS deviation, then you don't really need to replace them. They work fine generally. I've never had a I've honestly never had a plastic cylinder head fail on me, so maybe some cheaper ones you'd want to replace, but if you have a good brand, you probably don't need to replace that. But the exception, of course, is the O-ring nozzle. That's very important because most guns don't come with that stock. Okay guys, I took a little break, but I would say the third step for building a DMR is the internals. So after you've already picked out your gun, you've decided what gun or what internals you want to keep and what you want to throw away, I would upgrade those internals, and I'll be talking about the best brands for each part and how to tune each one of that part of your gearbox. So the piston is one of the most important parts to upgrade. I would just go with SHS. They work well. Basically, you want to correct the AOE on your piston, which is a lot of guides, but just very simply, normally the sector gear, this is the piston, this is the sector gear, it picks it up like this. When you AOE it, you put some padding at the front on the cylinder head so it sets the cylinder back. So when the sector gear picks it up, it has a flat surface area to pick it up on, and that is just what works. I would also glue in your metal tooth rack to the SHS piston. I would definitely do that. And for piston weight, I wouldn't Swiss cheese it on a DMR, just keep it as it is, but I wouldn't put ball bearings on it. And for the piston head, really most piston heads will work. I've liked retro arms, and Lonex has worked well. I actually have the retro arms double O-ring piston head. It has a small O-ring and a normal type 14 sized O-ring, and those have both worked well. And the other thing is you want to stretch out your piston head to get better compression. There's guides on that too. For gears, I would personally recommend Riot SC gears if you're going to replace your stock gears, because a lot of times SHS and ZCI will just be a side grade. They're not necessarily going to be an upgrade, unless you want to go for a lower ratio. But I just like using stock ratio gears for my DMRs. They make it more efficient and give it more time for heavier BBs to feed, so more reliability, and there'll be less stress on them. So that's just what I go for. You could choose to get better trigger response with like 16:1, 14:1, 13:1 gears, but for a DMR, I just stick with stock ratio gears normally. For barrel, I would recommend EDGI, PDI, or Prometheus. I only have used PDI and Prometheus myself, but a lot of people swear by EDGI, and I don't lap my barrels because I buy good ones. You can use a stock barrel and lap it, and some people get good results with that, but I don't have any personal experience with that. For the compression parts, meaning just the cylinder and the cylinder head, and maybe even the hopup bucking, just use whatever. I said it before, but you can use the stock parts if they work. Whatever gets you good compression, whatever works. Just those aren't going to break. You can seal them better with Teflon tape or RTV silicone. You can stretch out the piston head O-ring, and those all work. I personally use Teflon tape when I'm sealing things because RTV silicone is very permanent. For the hop-up, also it's the same story. Whatever works. I wouldn't recommend going out and buying Pro-Win hop-up or whatever. I would just use your stock hop-up. If that doesn't work, try something else. But if it works, it works. Just make sure you shim the hop-up arm so there's less play. But most hop-ups are actually pretty good nowadays. They used to be kind of shitty. But for cutoff lever, I would get a retro arms cutoff lever. Those have worked the best, like much better than anything else. Or you can get a BTC Spectre Mosfet, which I don't run in my DMR because there's no BBs in here. Just listen, I like the audible trigger reset of a mechanical trigger. So if you listen here, It resets there. I just like that because it's more realistic to me than the BTC. And also on safe, for the BTC you can still pull it. I have that on my M4. I don't like it on my SR25. Ball bearing spring guides. Most of the metal ones will work. Garter, Lonex. I prefer having quick change spring gearboxes, so you can't change it on those, but those will have the ball bearing spring guides. I like Retro Arms gearboxes a lot. And also Lonex gearboxes are good too. I'm just covering the gearboxes too really quick. For motors, really anything over 22 TPA will work if it's a Neo motor. So SHS Blue, or not SHS Blue, JG Blue motors are good. SHS 16 TPA high torque motors will work, but ZCI high torques are also 22 TPA. Basically TPA, the higher, the more torque it is, the slower the motor is. Since it's a semi-auto build, slower is basically better, but sometimes it can be too slow. I've used the ASG 28 TPA motor. I didn't like it as much as 22 TPA motors because it's kind of weird, but yeah. For Mosfet, I would get one with a poly fuse, but anything works. You want that basically just to protect your trigger contacts. I like the BTC Spectre, like I said before. In this gun, I have a Nuke FET. In one of my other guns, I have a Python 34 amp polyfuse Mosfet. Polyfuse Mosfet is nice because it protects your electrical system if something goes wrong. You don't have to worry about it, and you don't have to replace a fuse. For the battery, I would just get it from Hobby King, or if you need it like next day for the game, you can go to a hobby shop and pick one up. Just get the biggest battery your gun can fit, as long as it's 11.1. And that basically covers it for the internal parts. You know, going into RHOP and tuning, I basically definitely RHOP your gun, make your compression good, get, like I said before, the solid consistent power output, and get some good mags that can feed heavier BBs, because some shitty mags can't. So now I'm going to talk about external parts. These are not attachments, so I'm not going to be talking about the scope right now. I'm just going to be talking about the external parts. If you're getting an AR-15 type platform that's modular like this, you can put whatever rail, whatever stock on it. You can basically do whatever you want, but like you see here, my rail and my receiver had a bit of play because the grub screws are basically old on this rail. This rail is pretty old, so I basically retrofitted this little thing here between my rail and my receiver. Sorry, I accidentally hit my mag release. I basically retrofitted this little rail thing here between my rail and my receiver just to lock it up tighter, so there's no wobble, because basically you want to make your platform as solid as possible. And if you can see here, this is only really for AR style platforms, but this is the stock screw that goes in here. These are not stock screws, they're actually extended screws that go and contact the outer barrel. For a real steel gun, you don't want to do this. For airsoft, it helps to lock everything down a little better. And I also have those at the end here, so my inner barrel, or my outer barrel, has no play at all. Basically, a lot of DIY things you can do. You just want to make your gun as solid as possible, so there's no wiggle room, no vibrations. That'll get it shooting more accurately. For an AK type gun, if you have a SEMA or anything that doesn't have, like anything that's basically not an LCT, an E&O, or a real sword, I would recommend not taking it apart very much, because the pot metal barrels can wear over time and cause it to be bad, and it's hard to fix, and you basically need to buy a new receiver at that point. But you can see this is a real sword SVD right here, and this gun is like beautifully built. This, even though it's so long, you might think there's some wobble, but no, it's as solid as it can be, because it's basically the best externals you can buy for airsoft. One more thing I'm going to cover is long range barrels. Not a lot of people cover those. They're kind of old technology that people used to use. You can only really get them for M4s, but basically what it does is it will slightly cant a different outer barrel you can buy that will slightly be canted upwards. So without a hop up, it'll be putting backspin on the BB because of the trajectory of the outer barrel. And HS5 made some of those in carbon fiber that you can get, but they're discontinued and hard to find. I've never tried them, but I've just covered them because maybe they'll be good. Step 5, I would say is your attachments. This is going to be very brief just because you could talk about attachments for days, but a lot of people with DMRs want a scope. For me, I didn't like the scope alone. I preferred the red dot, but ever since I threw this piggybacked red dot on here, I've actually liked this setup a lot more than just the red dot, especially because my biggest thing with the scope is on an AR platform, it's hard to, when you're just walking around, keep a really tight cheek weld, which is, if you're using face protection, is what you need to get down on the scope. So I like this because I can just kind of walk around with it without being as tight on my body and still have a red dot to aim with for closer range engagements, 60 or 100 feet, whatever your MED is at your field for DMR. The same thing goes with this Dragunov right here, the SVD. This PSO scope, you can actually still use that. This is me using the scopes. This is me using the iron sights. You can still aim down the iron sights with the scope. So it's the same type of idea. I like having, if I have a scope, I like having two ways to aim. I wouldn't really cant a red dot on the side because the hop up on the gun requires you to keep the gun level. So that's that. For bipods, I say no for airsoft because they're good for shooting 500 meters or 600 meters or whatever. They're not needed for the max range of an airsoft gun is basically 100 meters. You won't be needing that, and it's more of a modular game, especially if you're playing the DMR role and not a bolt action role. You're going to be engaging people, actively moving. I would just ditch a bipod. I wouldn't get it. For zoom cams, I have one right here. This is a Pecbox zoom cam with two Mobiuses. I don't know if you can see it here. Two Mobiuses in that, selfie cam, zoom cam. They're good. I like them. And the other thing, I made a video on this before with a magnifier and a red dot. I would not really recommend magnifiers. I don't like them much. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy. And if you guys want to see like a more detailed review of this gun right here, which is my DMR, I can make that. But if you have any questions or if I missed anything, just let me know in the comments and I will help you guys out. So I hope you guys enjoyed my first video with this camera. Sorry my voice is dying, but see you next time.